I'm Mark Hagan, and for the next 3 hours I'll be taking a look back over the last 10 years. The staff of Radio 4th will be popping in and out of the studio to reminisce and to play you the very first records that they ever span over the airwaves. And as well, we'll be listening to some of the great moments in the story of Radio 4th.
6 a.m. Wednesday, the 22nd of January, and a very good morning to you all. I'm Richard Findlay, the programme controller of Radio 4th, your new independent local radio station. This is not only a historic occasion for all of us here in East Central Scotland, but it's also a deeply moving one despite the hour of the day, because at long last, we here in the East have our own radio station. A station that belongs to us and to us alone. A station that we can guide and shape. A station in which everyone can play an important role. A station that will listen as often as it speaks. Radio 4th belongs to us all, and it will be as strong and successful as we allow it to be. The groundwork has been laid already by the dedicated team gathered together from the four corners of what we now proudly call 4th Country. Help us to build on the foundations, and we'll have the best independent local radio station in the country. A dream is about to come true, because this, for the very first time, is Radio 4th.
Radio 4th, the 194, the brightest sound, gives you more. It's a tune in your heart and a smile on your face. All day long you'll be humming this song, the brightest sound that gives you more. Radio 4th, the 194. Radio 4th, the 194, the brightest sound that gives you more. It's a tune in your heart and a smile on your face. All day long you'll be humming this song, the brightest sound that gives you more. Radio 4th, the 194. Radio 4th, the 194.
Hello there, this is Steve Hamilton on Radio 4th, bringing you the Daybreak Show right through till 9:30. We're sitting at the top of the dial on top of the world on 194 meters in the medium wave band, 96.8 VHF in super stereo. We'll be bringing you news, traffic, weather, community information, food prices, tips and hints, and our housewife of the day. The Daybreak Show, that's where the action is every morning of the week, and that's where the music is specially selected by you, for you. Like this one from our very own chart-topping group here in Scotland, Pilot.
And that's how Radio 4th started 10 years ago today. Radio 4th was the second Scottish independent station to go on the air, and the then managing director was Christopher Lucas, now head of the Royal Society of Arts in London.
I was, of course, employed by the Independent Broadcasting Authority and was one of John Thompson's two senior radio officers when the franchises were first issued. And so I was involved in the team that went round the country listening to applications for franchises, including the Capital and LBC, which was the first two in London. So I was there in the early days, and so of course knew all about the Radio 4th application. I was there in Edinburgh and heard the applicants making their case both in Edinburgh and London. And I did have an Edinburgh background, and although it certainly hadn't occurred to me at the time, when the advertisement for a managing director was put in the newspapers, something clicked, and I thought I should have a go at it.
What sort of stage was the company in when you did join? I mean, I believe we didn't even have a building at that point.
No, there was nothing. In fact, when I arrived in Edinburgh, I was given a desk in a small office in the Scotsman, and a franchise application of about 60 or 70 pages and a bank account of £500,000, and that was it. And we didn't have any premises in those at that time, and the target for going on air, that was, I think that the franchise was awarded on Christmas Eve of 1973. And the target for going on air originally had been, I think, November 1974, and we made it 2 months later. But in fact, actually, there were no premises, and I don't think we got there until, in the end, I don't think we got into Fourth House until October. It was a very tight thing.
What was your first priority then when you were given this bank account and this desk?
Really, the first priority, I think, was the technical one, and I remember first hunting for a chief engineer, and we found Jim Donaldson from STV. He was a wonderful find, and I greatly enjoyed working with Jim. And he, of course, was very technically competent, very shrewd, and had a nice dry wit, and he was a very reliable person too. He didn't have any he didn't go off with any crazy unrealistic ideas. You knew that if Jim came up with a proposal, it would be workable.
What about the rest of the other sort of senior staff of the then new Radio 4th?
Well, of course, there were, apart from the chief engineer, there were, of course, absolutely key appointments in the program controller, head of news, chief accountant, and sales manager. And my greatest concern of all was the program controller. Now, I had, I must admit, had an advantage in that I had listened to the application by Waverley Broadcasting, and on that team was Richard Findlay, who had been the intended program controller for Waverley if they had won the contract, and I remember being rather impressed by Richard in the interview. So when I was offered the job, I found out where Richard was and found that he was working at Capital Radio, and of course that meant we were both in London. So I remember the first time I rang him up and said, "Do you think you might be interested? Come and have a drink with me." And I remember having a drink in the bar of the Hyde Park Hotel with him. And I knew immediately that it was Richard I wanted.
First of all, I had to put out of my mind any preconceived ideas that I'd acquired in my previous life involved with the other group, because Radio 4th had quite specific views on what they required to be done. And on that basis, of course, they won the franchise. So when I arrived in Edinburgh, the first thing I had to do, obviously, was read a great deal. Certainly read the Radio 4th franchise application and find out what it was that we promised that we were going to do, and then interpret that and make sure that we had a program schedule that fulfilled our aspirations and our intentions. When I arrived in Edinburgh, actually, there was very little. I mean, there was Christopher Lucas sitting in a bare little office in the Scotsman building, which he'd rented temporarily. He had a desk and a telephone and a pocket calculator. I think that was about it. The office was so small, there was only room for that one desk, so I had a chair and a shelf in the corner.
Was it very much a question in those days of shooting into the dark? I mean, there wasn't very much independent radio at all then.
No, it was a question of shooting in the dark to some extent, but we had talked to quite a number of people in organisations, and so we had a fair idea of the kind of things that people required of a local radio station, at least their aspirations for a local radio station. Some of them weren't practical, others certainly were. And so we had a fair amount to build on, and a fair amount of market research had also been done. And we did have some indication of things that worked, obviously, in other local radio areas, stations that had started up and been successful before we came on air.
But apart from Richard and Jim Donaldson, of course, there were other very key personalities in Tom Steele, head of news, who we pinched from Radio Clyde, which we were particularly pleased about.
At that time, there were people in broadcasting who lived and breathed radio. Fortunately, I happened to be one of them. And fortunately, I was one of the few people who had some kind of experience in the world of local radio, which I'd secured down south. Also, I had a great love, and I still have, of this particular area. So when the opportunity arose to come to Edinburgh and settle here in a city, in an area which I knew incredibly well, I just jumped at the opportunity. It was absolutely marvellous.
And presumably your experience at Radio Clyde must have helped enormously in setting up Forth.
Well, what it did was it knocked a lot of traditional held views about broadcasting that I had actually gathered over the years, and it did help, I suppose in my own way, to relate these ideas to this area in technical ways and in forms of coverage.
Of course, Tom's personality shines through, and I remember his great cry for rolling news was the Steele thing at the time.
What actually came first here, which was not really something that was started in the West, was the whole concept of rolling news, where people in the news told the news, where you weren't actually taking a news judgment on a daily basis on each hour, but you were actually taking an hourly news judgment. So that our story, which was running on the news service on the hour, up to then, in other radio services, you would hear time after time after time after time. There was a lack of freshness, and there was a lack of understanding about what the radio media could do, in that it had one thing that nobody else had, and that was immediacy. So therefore the concept of rolling was to highlight the news of that particular hour, and the great benefit was you had 4 areas in the day in which you could have wrap-ups on what had actually gone on the previous 3 or 4 hours. They were 8 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock at lunchtime, 5:30 with our flagship news programme, Fourth Report, and in the evening at 10.
And presumably that's a very much more exciting way of presenting the news.
Well, not only that, you see, but everybody who's in the local news can actually tell it on their own local radio station. So what we were doing was we were hanging a microphone over East Central Scotland, saying, everyone here is a potential broadcaster. This is your local radio station. Grab the microphone, because we're out and about. We've got the area wired for sound. Tell us what's going on. Tell us what's happening over your garden fence, and also what's not happening over your garden fence. And we'll broadcast that voice of Forth Country to everybody else in Forth Country. Marvellous communication. It was two-way, you see. Up to then, it was basically one way. The broadcasters, in the little myth of a box, almost with a paternalistic attitude, telling people what was going on and what they should do. What we did was, through phone-ins and through wiring the area for sound, and with our radio cars and our walkie-talkies and our news cars, was actually taking the microphone out of this box, this self-protection, and saying, hey, come on, join us.
He was a great catch. Alan Wilson, another wonderful catch from STV, who ran the finances. And I was terribly keen that it wasn't going to be I felt that it shouldn't be an all-male team. So when the opportunity came to hire a female as our sales manager in Frida Todd, I thought that was something we should aim for. The great thing about that original team, I think, was that really the excitement and the sense of creating something new enabled us all to totally ignore the boundaries of a normal working day. A working day didn't really seem to exist. It didn't matter. Of course, you couldn't keep that up for endlessly, and the shock of reality, commercial reality, quite quickly caught up with us once we'd started broadcasting, which of course is a very good thing.
The man who came face to face with that commercial reality was financial controller Alan Wilson.
This is going back to the days before we actually spent money, of course, so things were wonderful. But going back to 1974, within a couple of months, I always remember the date of 2nd of December 1974. That was the day that all the other members of staff joined us, Mark. Pretty traumatic day, to be honest. And from there on, we had a lot of dry running and so on. We went on air, as you know, on the 22nd of January, 75. And by the time we got to, our financial year end is in the September of each year. By the time we got to September 75, we had lost £211,000 cumulatively. It's a lot of money nowadays. Of course, it was even more money then. But that year really wasn't the main problem. We expected to make a loss, obviously, in that year. But we did expect to do significantly better in the year to September 76. To be honest, we didn't. We lost £176,000 that year.
Oh, it goes up all the time, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't really go down.
Well, that meant that by the time we got to September 76, we had actually run up a cumulative deficit of nearly £400,000. And obviously that was something we had to take action on. And we'd been taking action before that.
And how did you manage to overcome this debt?
Well, the first problem, of course, was that we were spending too much money. The other problem was that revenue-wise we weren't bringing enough money in, which is a bit of a nasty nightmare, to be honest. Cost-wise, we were actually staying within budget. And that's only satisfactory if the revenue's also on budget. The fact was we were staying within budget, but we were still spending too much money. It obviously meant the budgets were too high. We were doing very laudable things like drama with Mary Queen of Scots, Deacon Brodie, etc. But we had to look at that, and we were overstaffed, to be honest, in those days as well, and we had to look at cutbacks on that side too. By the time, round about, I think, March or April 77, so not very, within about 6 months of that, we actually started to go into a monthly operating profit situation. And by the time we got to the year ended September 77, we made a profit, albeit a small one of about £20,000, but by Jove, it was some turnaround from 176 loss the previous year. And actually that year to September 76, which seems so long ago now, we're now talking of 8 years ago, we've been in profit every year since that. So since those very difficult years, we've actually had a very good track record, and as I say, in profit every year for the last 8 years.
When did you start employing the people who would actually be broadcasting the programmes, the presenters and the DJs and those sort of people?
We started hiring the broadcasters as soon as we moved into Fourth House, which was in October. And that therefore gave Richard about 3 months of training time. Not much, but it was enough because one wanted to really maintain the excitement and the adrenaline had to keep running. And I think that if it had been much longer than 3 months, then the tension might have been too much.
What was the feeling like then as you approached 6 o'clock on January the 22nd?
It was very nerve-wracking. None of us had any sleep, I don't think, that night. I think we were just carried along on nervous energy. Very exciting, and it all went off without a hitch, and it was very moving.
I was very keen that we should dry run as much as we possibly could. It was a little difficult because the studios were being built as we tried to rehearse and use them. But nonetheless, we managed to get, I think, as I remember correctly, something like almost 2 weeks, perhaps 10 days of real dry running where we actually practiced and rehearsed precisely as we would appear on air, as it were. So, for example, at that time, the morning programme, the breakfast programme, started at 6 o'clock. So that's exactly when we did the dry runs for the breakfast programme, and we did the whole thing in sequence in real time, as it were. It was quite arduous, obviously, for a great many of the staff, because it meant that people had to be here from very early in the morning till very late at night as the dry runs took place.
Did that enable you to work out a lot of mistakes that might otherwise have been made publicly?
Yes, I mean, it meant that some of the more obvious mistakes, perhaps, that people might make, we managed to make before we went on air. Nonetheless, I mean, there are things that happen when you're live and the adrenaline's flowing that you can't anticipate. So I'm not going to suggest for a moment that in the first few days that we were broadcasting, we didn't have the odd little hiccup. But nonetheless, I think that it gave everybody confidence to use the equipment, because you have to bear in mind that with perhaps just one or two exceptions, everybody was totally new to broadcasting.
What were your aspirations for Radio 4 at that point?
Well, I felt very strongly that we should not be regarded purely as the Edinburgh radio station, because a large part of our potential audience was outside the city of Edinburgh. And so, despite the fact that we're based in the city, I was very keen to ensure that people in Fife, in the various parts of Fife and West Lothian and parts of Central Region that we covered, and of course East Lothian, and at that time too, we were being picked up in the borders, remember, that we should also be regarded as a local station for them and provide them with a service. And so there were small points that we picked up immediately. For example, on traffic bulletins, to say that Hope Street has a blockage of traffic, I mean, one wonders how many Hope Streets there are in Forth Country. So there were small things like that. But my aspiration really was that we should be regarded very much as a friend to the community, as being helpful to the community, as being entertaining, and being informative, and being a utility, something that people could use in the same way as they use electricity or gas. I mean, turn us on, and hopefully we would then turn them on too.
Did you feel that there was a point when all that started to come together?
Yes, I remember quite a number of people saying before we started broadcasting, you'll never get people on this side of Scotland to take part in competitions and phone up and participate in your programmes. We're far too reserved here. And I think that I knew that the radio station had really worked when, quite early on in the breakfast programme, Steve Hamilton, who was doing the breakfast programme at that time, opened up the telephone lines, I think for his first competition, and our phone-in switchboard just lit up like a Christmas tree.
Rock on, baby, rock on. I'm not gonna beg you to stay. Mama didn't raise
Well, Brenda Lee there with Rock On, Baby, Rock On, and we've got our first contestant has phoned in about the mystery voice. It's a Mrs. E. Hampton. Good morning, Mrs. Hampton.
Good morning.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Whereabouts do you live, Mrs. Hampton?
Whitson Road.
That's whereabouts in Edinburgh, is that?
Stenhouse area.
Ah, fine. Now, okay, you heard the mystery voice. You stand to win £20 worth of groceries. What do you think?
Liberace?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Hampton.
Oh, dear.
Wrong. Not to worry. You can try. We'll be doing more later on. You can always try again.
Thank
okay.
you very much. All the
Thanks
best with
very
yourself.
much. Thank you
Super
very
so
much.
far.
Okay, bye-bye, Mrs.
Thank
Hampton.
you, bye.
there was a girl,
Name Marie.
was a boy.
Donnie. Well, as I said, 10 years ago to the very day, I would give Eleanor Hampton a second chance if she phoned in again. Well, here we are, January the 22nd, 1985, and by the miracle of modern science and our incredible research team, we've found our very first caller on the very first breakfast show on Radio 4 10 years ago, Eleanor Hampton. Hello, Eleanor.
Hello, Steve.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Well, how
It was
does it-
very hard to find. I haven't moved in 10 years.
You mean you've been in the same place for 10 years?
More or less, yes.
Our research team told me they had folk out searching for you for 6 months. They've been lying through their teeth again. Well, how does it feel to be back on the same radio station 10 years later?
Super. I'm just delighted. Congratulations. I'm really pleased it's kept going. I think it's a really comprehensive station. I love it.
Great, so you're obviously still a fan.
Oh, yes.
Well,
But competing with two teenagers nowadays is kind of difficult. You know, they were at least at 10 years ago. People say, sit down and be quiet.
Yes, a couple of toddlers when we started. Mind you, we've all aged over the years, Eleanor. But listen, I tell you...
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, you haven't?
No, no.
Oh, well, that's
No.
fair enough. Good,
Peter
good.
Pan's the middle name.
Well, that's it. Oh, Peter Pan's the middle name. Right, Eleanor, we're going to give you a second chance to get the answer right. Now, you heard it 10 years ago, and you said it was Liberace. This time, I want you to listen carefully again and see who you think it could be 10 years on. Same person, but you might have a better chance of getting it. Listen to this.
I have never been, the handsome leading man type, or anything, thank God. And I think that an awful lot of people, I know that in America, an awful lot of people think I'm just like the guy next door or them.
Right, well, 10 years on, who could it be?
I know who it is. I'm just astonished I didn't get it the first time. It's Jack Lemmon, isn't
Jack
it?
Lemmon. Now, do you realise 10 years ago you could have won £20 worth of groceries, which by today's standards would probably be worth about £100.
Well, that's right.
However, there's no prize this time, Eleanor.
Oh, dear.
There is only the absolute wonderful kudos of appearing on this amazing anniversary programme.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted.
But Eleanor, thank you very much indeed for being with us 10
Thank
years
you
on.
very much,
And you
Steve.
never know, 10 years from now we may just give you
Well,
another
good
ring.
luck for the next 10 years.
Eleanor, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Well, Steve, enough of how our very first caller feels about being back on the radio station after 10 years. What sort of memories did that bring back for you?
Well, actually, it's funny listening to it because obviously I was terrified and I obviously wasn't listening to a single word the poor lady said to me. Because the tension on that first morning was incredible. As Richard Findlay said, first of all, we were terrified nobody would phone us. Secondly, we'd been up since, 2 o'clock in the morning, panicking. The nerves were incredible. And you've got to bear in mind that because it was the first morning, you weren't sitting in the studio as we are now on our own having a chat, etc. We had everybody lined up in a control room staring through the window. And you've got little me, fresh out of drama college, and my boss in front of me, the chairman of the company, the board, the chief executive, all staring through the window, standing behind poor Sandy Wilkie, who was the engineer at the time. I mean, everybody was a wreck for the whole, I think it was, 4 hours the first programme, or was it 3 hours? I can't remember now.
3 and a half.
3.5, yes. 3.5, that's right, 6 till 9:30. And we're wrecks, totally.
Was it an exciting moment, though, for you?
Oh, very, yes. I mean, incredible. Well, we started with the company in December of the year before, and we practiced, which doesn't show on the original tape. But we did practice, and we all thought, right, this is it, we're now into professional radio, the second company to open in Scotland as an independent radio station. And it was very important that the capital city had a quality sound and everything else, because subsequently, if you really listened to it, we didn't, because we were all inexperienced and trying to find our way, and of course, the memory of pirate radio stations and of course what the BBC were doing was with everybody, and we all wanted to sound like our heroes, you know, whether it was Tony Blackburn or one of the pirate station guys from Radio Scotland in that era, and we're all trying to do that kind of image because it was completely wrong for Edinburgh in a way, so we had to kind of adjust to that and find a level to aim at for Fourth Country.
How did you pick that first record, Pilots January?
At this stage in life I honestly couldn't tell you. I think actually probably Richard Findlay picked it. A man of great talent and entrepreneurial skills. He came up with that one, I think, if I remember rightly.
While that might have been a frightening experience for Steve Hamilton, it was no less so for programme coordinator Sandy Wilkie, then a technical operator.
I was so nervous. I was in a porcelain seat. I really was nervous, and I was behind the glass, and I had to push up the faders, and almost didn't. And the chief engineer at the time, Jim Donaldson, stuck his hand on my elbow, and my hands were locked onto the fader, and I was frozen, and he shoved the elbow, and up went the faders. So at the end of the day, my hand did put the station on air, and on came Richard, and then on came Steve.
How long did it take you to sort of settle down and be able to move your arm freely?
Oh, I had to do it almost in the first 15 minutes, but the nerves were past by that time, and we'd practiced for about 6 weeks on the principles of running a station with TOs at that time. We had actually had to take the news, so we had 2 desks to control, and we had to take news inserts and commercials, and we also had to run any inserts into programme. So we had our own record deck, we had a number of tape machines, 3 cart machines and 2 very special desks, one for programming and one for news, and we ran 2 studios on the 18 hours a day that we were on, completely TO controlled. Now it's automated, and the DJs, presenters, work as clerks, engineers, presenters, producers, directors. They do everything.
I bet you're awfully glad.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Well, what else do you remember about those first few days, Sandy?
They were hectic, filled with great fun. It was a brand new experience. I mean, some 40, 50 people brought together, getting to know each other over the 6-7 weeks of preparation, and hoping that everything that we had done would come to fruition on the day, and it did. I think it worked very well. Very, very exciting. Particularly the pre-on-air stages, the building of the studios, on my part, the technical parts, I found great fun.
The engineering department had, of course, been working flat out to get the news station on the air. Graham Warman takes up the story.
Well, it all started, I think, I started on the 2nd December, before the station went on air, and when I actually arrived here, there's very, very little happening. All you could see was miles and miles of cable hanging out of sort of like trunkings in walls, and all this cable had to be joined up between studios and what we call MCR, Master Control Room. And by the time we finished, Jim Donaldson, who was no longer with us at the time, was chief engineer, calculated it out to be about 8 miles of cable and on the reason of about 24,000 soldered joints.
How long does it take you to do it?
To get the station on air for the basic wiring took us about 4 weeks, 5 weeks. But that's a lot of the guys working on the wiring, and the main thing was Studio B, which is our main on-air studio.
Did you have any major technical problems?
Yes, sore knees was the main thing. Sore knees and long hours, but it was great fun. I mean, the enthusiasm is still here today, but it was amazing because everybody just kept working and working because it's a new thing to build and bring. It's like having a little baby boy or something arrive. You nursed it and nursed it, and it grew and grew and grew, and more things happened. New equipment arrived every day, and said, "Oh, the cart machines have arrived. Oh, great! You know, we can put the jingles on here now, and the commercials, and the presenters started playing with those and things like that." I mean, when they first arrived, I think they had one turntable and no microphone in Studio B.
No, that very first programme, Steve Hamilton's Breakfast, the Daybreak show, I think it was called
right.
then.
Oh, yeah.
Was actually, that very first one must have been quite a technically demanding one, because there were several live link-ups with other stations in it.
Yes. At that time, we had a lot of what they called technical operators, sort of working the station, and it meant that we always had somebody in Master Control Room manning and keeping an eye on the level and the station output. And Sandy Wilkie was the first tech op on duty that morning, and I was the one that followed him after that. I mean, I think Sandy was in here about 4 o'clock in the morning. He couldn't sleep, and I was at home at the time just waiting for that magic hour for the station to go on. I don't know, I just got one big kick out of it. It was a great thing, but you just had to sit there and play the commercials for the disc jockey. You know, for when he played a Radio Force jingle, it meant that we had to put the commercials out at that time. It took a lot of the weight off the presenters at the time.
And this is what happened when Steve tried to contact LBC in London.
This is Radio 4 at the top of the dial on 194 metres. We're the 10th independent local radio station to go on air. Right now, we're going over live to the Join the Men on the morning show at the first station on the air itself, London Broadcasting, the all-news station in the heart of London. So, from the capital of Scotland, it's over now to Clive Roslin in the capital of England. Good morning, Clive. Good morning, Clive. How are we doing? We're not doing too well here. Clive, you there? Hello.
Siren alarm.
Hello.
And flashing lights. We
morning.
would also like to see...
Oh, we seem to have a slight problem there, not to worry. We'll try and get back to them as quickly as we possibly can.
Something for the girl with everything.
And it wasn't just technical things that went wrong in those early days. Tom Steele remembers one incident particularly vividly.
Well, first of all, I absolve all responsibility completely of the haggis experiment and the haggis promotion. But apparently there were some people in this radio station who thought it'd be a marvellous stunt to have this huge haggis, the biggest haggis in the world, a real one, put it on the back of this huge truck and set off from St Andrews, drive all the way through Fourth Country, across to Stirling, into Falkirk, East Lothian, Edinburgh, the whole thing, and get people to guess the weight of this haggis. And the prize would be a super-duper £100 holiday. At that time, that was a lot of money. Well, things actually didn't start to go well, because when this mobile haggis was going across the Forth Road Bridge, people kind of forgot that at that time of year you get quite a windy area. So the bunting and the decorations and the whole thing of this wonderful haggis machine, Haggis Mobile, ended up in the Firth of Forth, point one. When we actually arrived at St Andrews, we had a bit of a problem, because you see the haggis started to, should I say, deflate. So we didn't really have a kind of haggis mound, it was more or less like a haggis pancake. So we had a bit of a shoring up problem there. The next thing that happened was it ended up at Stirling, and for some reason it disappeared from its garage in Stirling, and it ended up, according to a telephone call that I received in Master Control here at 3 o'clock in the morning, because I was sleeping in the station, from the police saying, "Excuse me, but there's a haggis blocking the A9 and there's a 2-mile traffic jam on the other side of it." And of course the whole thing was snowing, you know, it was terrible weather. So immediately I got on this breakdown service, And I said, excuse me, this is Radio 4 calling. Our haggis is blocking the main A9, and which upon he slammed the phone down, of course. So I called back, explained the situation. So there we were, in this howling gale, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, with this traffic jam, caused by this haggis. So eventually we managed to get the haggis rescued, and the kind of promotion, it kind of just disappeared after that.
Never thought of doing it again?
No.
Mike Scott.
What happened was the station was going a year, and I decided to make a tape, send it in, and I got accepted.
What program were you accepted for in those days?
Well, what I really wanted was just to continue my day job, as they say, and just do one show a week. But they asked me to give up my job and come full time, which I thought at the time, precarious. Right, so I decided to take the job, and I was put straight on the breakfast show.
Had you actually been listening to Forth for that year?
I must be honest, no.
Not at all?
Maybe once or twice, but I decided to tune in. I said, I remember I used to do this, so I'll try and make a tape up and send it in, and I got the job.
So what was it like doing the breakfast show and getting up at some hideously early hour in the morning, as you still do, of course?
Yes. Well, at that time, a bit strange at first, but, you get used to it. Your body gets used to it. And after saying that, now, I mean, late nights are definitely out, but you've just got to, your body becomes adjusted to it.
Did you ever actually miss your deadline in the early days before your body had adjusted to it?
Twice in 9 years I've done it. The first time my alarm clock didn't go off and my phone went out of order. And what happened was I was lying in bed. It was about May, and it was quite a bright morning. And what happened was I just got this feeling I could see a blue light, boom, boom, going through the bedroom. And I got up and I looked out the window. Here's this police car outside, and I opened the window and he said, you've slept in, So what security guard had to do was phone the police. So the police came down with a panda car, and they woke me up. So I jumped out of my pajamas, into my clothes, downstairs into the car, and I was in here in about 13 minutes. And I just made it with a minute to spare.
You've never done it since?
Touch wood, no.
What was the first record you ever played, Mike, on Radio 4?
The first record, if my memory serves me correctly, was Billy Swan, I Can Help, which incidentally I played this morning on the breakfast show.
In 1977, Christopher Lucas left Radio 4 and Richard Findlay took over as managing director.
It changed my job to the extent that I had more to worry about. But nonetheless, I think it was quite a useful thing to have been program controller, because after all, the lifeblood of the station is the programs that it broadcasts. And I think that any managing director of an organisation such as Radio 4 really has to have some kind of an understanding and empathy for the programs. So I found it helpful to have come from that background. Having said that, the problem that we had at that time was not the programming, and it wasn't our news service. It was on the sales side. So that's the side that I immediately had to put the bulk of my efforts and thinking in order to bring the sales revenue in. And that we managed to do with the help of a new sales director that we appointed at the time, Derek Gorman, who fortunately is still in the city, now heads up one of our major advertising agencies in the town. Derek joined us, and he and I managed to pull the sales effort together. And at the same time, Tom Steele, who had been my deputy and head of news, moved into my seat, as it were, after a few months, and the team worked very well. And I think one of the significant things, perhaps, about Radio 4 is the fact that, apart from a change, really, on the sales side, because Derek Gorman then left us to become managing director elsewhere, the senior management have been together right from the very beginning, and we work very well together as a team. We understand each other, and we understand each other's little foibles and likes and dislikes.
Has that been useful, do you think?
I think it has. I think that the continuity is quite important. I mean, it is a strange business in the sense that there are pressure points every day and every week. There are crises of all sorts going on all the time, whether it's a major news story breaking, whether it's some difficulties that we're having in getting the right people for a program, guests turning up, not turning up, major advertising presentations to be made. And I think that being a relatively small complement in terms of the total staff, I think it's very good that people do pull together and work together, and that happens throughout the station. It doesn't obviously just happen on the management side.
And obviously one of the best examples of this was in 1979. We had that terrible weather, and the station more or less turned into the snow line.
Yes. Well, when I mentioned earlier that one of my aspirations was that Radio 4 should be regarded as a utility, I mean, the snow line, I think, was absolutely the shining example of radio being used as a utility. It was being used there for a very, very practical purpose, and that was to help people and keep people in touch, and act as almost as a cipher for the emergency services and a means of local communications. And so I was very, very proud of the snow line, as I think we all were here.
It came about, basically, and this is a little known fact, that we actually ran a mini snow line the year before. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the weather got pretty bad. Not as serious as the following year, but pretty bad. And we pulled in the Lord Provost, and we pulled in the then convener of the regional council, and we sat them down around the studio, and if anybody had a problem or something, they would phone up and we would try and help. And we thought the weight, you see, of these characters, that something would actually, they would get people's fingers out and such like, and actually help. And that went on for about 2.5 to 3 hours, and that was it. I put that at the back of my mind. We all did. And we thought, well, that's interesting. This is quite interesting. Then a year went past, and then, at the end of the year, everything happened. The gritters were on strike. There was terrible weather. All the shops were closed. Television was all canned. Newspapers were not publishing. We were the only means of local communication, apart from the telephone, left in this area. Got a telephone call at home, and they said the weather's pretty bad, the whole thing. And I said, right. Drove in, and as I drove in, I realised that this, we were really up against something. And we opened up the phone lines, and there was a surge of telephone calls of people in trouble. So we set up the snow line, and it went on for 4 days. 4 days in which there were, various things going on air, about the problems that people were facing. But what really struck me more than anything else was the community spirit that was actually coming out, the way that people were willing to help each other. We had dozens of plumbers in reception, on call, dashing out. We had people who were willing to go out and sweep the streets. We had people who were willing to take nurses to hospital. We had people, we said, the Sick Children's Hospital needs milk. Within half an hour, there were 2 milk lorries there with milk. It was absolutely astonishing. I actually had the kind of feeling, though, about 3 days in, when we got a telephone call from a lady who said that her son had fallen down a set of stairs and cut herself on a milk bottle. And she said, what can I do? And I said, well, phone an ambulance. And it was then I realised that we were taking over from everything. So we stopped actually putting out the phone number after that, but it still went on. And then, of course, the thaw came, and then we had the plumb line, which I think was terrific,
I've just had a message. Peter Wilson is now on the phone with Val Monroe of the unions. Hello, Peter.
Hello, is that you, Tom?
No, it's Clarke Tait here.
Oh, it's Clarke.
Yes,
Peter.
Peter.
Your voices are getting so similar now. It's probably the long day you've had.
Not at all. I'm sure you've had a long day as well, Peter, but I know what the whole of Fourth Country is waiting to hear now. How did the talks go?
Well, good and bad. We've had informal discussions, as only they could be, because after all, the responsibility of this firmly rests between the Manpower Committee and the unions. And what, in fact, we have agreed is that the both sides must come together as soon as is humanly possible. And I'm now going to attempt to get this going now by getting in touch with the appropriate chairman and officials. I think what we've definitely proved tonight, but with our talks, is that there is a desire on both our sides to try and get this resolved as soon as possible.
Peter, I have to say this, that sounds disappointing to me, because what does as soon as possible mean?
Well, as soon as possible, I can get in touch with the people who will have to make the decision, actually. I wish I could be the dictator type in this particular occasion and walk in myself and negotiate and make a decision, but that's just not the way it can be done.
I mean, I was even talking to the Lord Provost tonight, who said that he would be very willing to act as a mediator.
Well,
any help. I think everybody in Fourth Country is anxious for this dispute to be resolved one way or another. And when you say as soon as possible, the trouble is, Peter, as you well know, and I'm sure as the unions well know, that the danger is here and now.
I think we both appreciate that. In fact, I know we appreciate that. And, all the help that's been offered to you and that would be offered to me and the unions is welcome. It's more than welcome. But there are certain people who just cannot help. And I say this in the nicest and the kindest of ways. We appreciate there's a tremendous problem here. Otherwise, I doubt very much if you had ever had a group such as this sitting down at this particular time to try and resolve the problem.
Peter, we're going to be on the air 24 hours now. I know that from now until, say, midday tomorrow, we're going to be on the air with Snowline. And one thing I would offer you and the unions right now is the right to come into Radio 4, discuss it here, use Radio 4 in any way you can to get everything together, to get it resolved, to get the gritters out on the road again. Now, that is an unqualified offer both to you and to the union representatives. My own programme tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. If you want to come in and discuss it then, let's do it. Please, some way, let's get together as soon as possible.
Well, I think that's a super offer, and it's the usual kind of offer that comes from Radio 4 when we have these problems that they want to help. And if, in fact, we find that this is something that would help, I'm absolutely certain both sides would agree to do just what you're suggesting.
Peter, thank you very much indeed.
Would you like a word with...
Yes, I would. I was going to come on to... it's Val Monroe, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, Val. Val?
Hello?
Val, how do you see the situation?
Well, much as Peter said to you, what we need to have is a meeting of the Manpower Committee called as soon as possible. From our side, we're prepared to meet them as soon as they call this kind of meeting, but we have to have a firm and reasonable offer coming from the Manpower Committee before we can recommend to our members that they return to doing standby duties.
Well, realistically, how soon can we get the Manpower Committee together? I mean, where are they? Why don't we call them now and get them all together? I mean, it's urgent. It's now we need the grits in the road.
Yes, it is very urgent. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And as far as we're concerned, if we had that offer made tonight, we would be appealing to our members to return to work immediately. And I'm sure, in fact, that we could have the gritters operating by tomorrow.
Well, maybe it's back to Peter Wilson then. Peter, why don't we call the Manpower Committee tonight and get them, wherever they are, to get a meeting arranged right now?
Well, as I've said to you, this is what I'm attempting to do now, but it would be wrong of me to pretend that it was possible to do it tonight. I think you appreciate what it's like outside.
Sure.
We've been lucky to get the people from around Edinburgh to come together. Lucky because of the type of weather and the bad conditions on the road, and we've had help from sources that I won't name, but who have been very helpful. Now, to get the Manpower Committee together, and they come from as far as Dunbar and Whitburn and all around, it's going to be difficult. And this is the task that I'm faced with starting now whenever I'm finished talking with you.
Peter, I know that you're going to get on the telephone and round them up. I'm sure Val isn't entrenched. I'm sure you're not entrenched. I'm sure we can come to some middle ground, and I'm sure the whole of Fourth Country would like that to happen. Please, I don't need to remind you of your responsibilities, both of you, but there is danger all around us, and you are the guys, both of you, who can sort it out. Okay?
Well, thank you, and I think thank you for helping to bring us together, dare I say, because it was you, the local radio, that in fact did it in the end. I didn't know how to make contact with people. You made it for us, so you've started the ball rolling, and we'll kick it along as quickly and as fast as we can to get a result.
Peter, I believe that, and I'm sure the whole of Radio 4th Country believes that as well, and that is what we're here for.
Up until that point, I mean, I think, as I remember rightly, something like 40% of the population in our transmission area listened to us. I think that during the course of the days of the snow line, if we'd had any audience research, which of course we couldn't because nobody could actually get out and do it, but nonetheless, I suspect that we'd probably have something like 99% of the population listening to us during that time. And I think that some of the doubters in the community who perhaps were wedded to a BBC concept of broadcasting and couldn't conceive listening to a commercial radio station, and indeed probably couldn't conceive watching a commercial television station. I think that they said, well, we don't necessarily like everything Radio 4th does, but nonetheless we have to accept that it's a very useful and a good broadcasting organisation.
Programming always, has been the main strength of this radio station. Even before the Snow Line, we were innovative, with drama, with Mary Queen of Scots, with Deacon Brodie, and who knows, it may come back. We did it in such a way that he might. With lots of new style of programming, the Fourth Line with Gene Harland at one time, with Nancy Mitchell, with our consumer program, with lots of things that have never actually been tried out in Scottish radio at all. And when the Snow Line came along, it really was the kind of policy and the kind of statement of intent that we had, which actually went into it. So I'm not surprised that it actually happened, and we coped with it in that way. I'm just delighted that we did. And of course that's continued because the Snow Line created the Open Line on Saturday evenings, because the Snow Line was an area of environmental crisis. And when we're looking at the whole problem of the crisis that people face, then obviously there are also the personal crises as well.
Radio 4, the 194, the brightest sound that gives you more. Puts a tune in your heart and a smile on your face. All day long you'll be humming this song. The brightest sound that gives you more. Radio 4, the 194. Radio 4, the 194. The brightest sound that gives you more. Puts a tune in your heart and a smile on your face. All day long you'll be humming this song. The brightest sound that gives you more. Radio 4, the 194. Radio 4, the 194. Dovey is calling you. Fife, we're calling you. Radio 4 is everywhere, like a seagull soaring in the air. Stand on the bridge and you'll surely hear the sound of freedom everywhere. Radio 4, the 194, the brightest sound that gives you more. Puts a tune in your heart and a smile on your face, like a seagull turning homeward bound. We share it round and round. The brightest sound that gives you more. Radio 4, the 194. Radio 4, the 194. Dovey is calling you. Fife, we're calling you. Dovey is calling you. Fife, we're calling you. Dovey is calling you. Fife, we're calling you.
The story of Radio 4th.